Hi, this is GM Atank, and welcome to Paint to Life. Tonight's episode, 5 mistakes to avoid, a paint and review of the Ogre from the Dungeons & Dragons Framework set from WizKids. It's episode 68. There's an unpainted version of the Ogre and one of its permutations that we're going to be working with. Before I get started, if you want to check out the story episode of this Ogre with halflings, ogres, and the God of Justice tier, you can find that link here and in the description below. So here's a list of the paints I used in this project, if you want to pause that and have them at hand. So, let's take a look at some ogres in a lineup. So here's a 3D printed miniature, a Reaper Bones, a Nozel's Marvelous miniature, and a Framework, so you can see the size comparison. 3D printed, scaled about 50 millimeters with my Elegumars 3. A Reaper Bones made of PVC plastic, kind of rubbery, and painted when I was starting out. Nozel's Marvelous miniatures, pre-primed with some details lost because of that, and my Frameworks assembled pre-primed miniature, or primed miniature that I did. There they all are in a line, so you can check out the differences if you so desire. Like the other Frameworks models, step 1, cut them off of the sprues. It's high polystyrene plastic. Come in a box. You'll need some hobby clippers to do so. Make sure you keep the flat ends of the blades alongside the piece you're going to be cutting out, and proceed to make your snips. I would hold onto the piece right before you cut that final sprue, especially if it's small, so it doesn't end up going flying. But cutting these things out is a bit of a breeze. I don't find much of a problem with it whatsoever. Now, mistake number 1, or as we call them on Paint to Life, happy accidents. One of the things that I did, I noticed in the instructions while I was moving through, there was a piece there. It looks like a brand, like one of the extra pieces, and I missed it completely on the sprue stanchion. See it there in the middle? So, when assembling this yourself, or any frameworks for that matter, make sure you have all the pieces accounted for when you're done. Now that we've snipped them off, we're going to have to clean the pieces. Using an X-Acto knife, there are little burrs where they were attached to the sprues. Depending on how good you are at snipping, maybe they're smaller burrs than others, but you are going to have to go ahead and cut these down. I would suggest you wear gloves doing this. I know I joked last time and said I have lizard hands and don't wear gloves, and I'm clearly not wearing them here. Except in a future episode, you're going to see me cut my finger with that blade. So apparently I'm not resistant to slashing damage after all. So probably still won't wear gloves because I'm stubborn, but just FYI, you should. Next step with any frameworks, now that you have your pieces, is to assemble them. You're going to have some leftovers that you're not going to use once you decide the pieces you want to use. Just put those aside for your kit bash pile. And at the end of my review, I'll go through what I liked about those pieces. So when we're going to assemble these, we're going to be using plastic cement. One of the benefits of polystyrene is you can use plastic cement. As you see, I wiped it with my finger. It doesn't make your finger stick, but it does fuse the pieces together in a permanent plastic weld. So the harder I pressed on them to fix them, the tighter they were and the smaller the seams and the gaps. So here along this ball, I pressed those two pieces hard together while they fused, and I didn't need to worry about gaps. Now you can see here on the ogre's head, there's a little teeny tongue. There it is from the front. I like when the pieces have these tongue and grooves. There it is from the head on, and you can plug the head's tongue and groove, and then it prevents them from slipping around. As you can see here, I tongue and groove, and it presses nicely, locks in place. And I've spoken with some of the people at WizKids. Adding more tongue and grooves to more pieces is something they're definitely working on for subsequent waves of frameworks. Now I'm assembling the shamanistic kind of bear hood. Again, beautiful. Press, hold, firm. Make sure it welds together. Once it dries, it's a permanent bond. It's great. Here's the top part with the bear's head. And now we're on to the second piece of the bear's claw. Now this is where I'm about to come into the second mistake, and you're going to see it in real time here. So as I'm gluing it, I'm trying to get it in position, and I muck it up, and I mucked it up, and it fell off, and it's still glue. There's glue there, and I'm pressing it, and I've lost. Okay, I put it on him to see how is it supposed to go. Oh, it fell off again, and now it's bent. And the whole time that plastic cement is melting away my polystyrene. Look, I just added a little more. And unfortunately, that nice fit is now ruined. Look at the two pieces and the gap between them. So, happy accident number 2, when using plastic cement, it does melt that plastic, so make sure you do it right. And if the piece doesn't fit nicely, you might have to do a little bit of repair work. Using silicone sculpting tools and green stuff, I'm going to in addition to the glue, make a green stuff repair, which with the tool stippling, it's going to look like fur when it's all done. The next step we're going to need to do is fill. Now, I didn't have to do this with my Mind Flayer last week, but as you can see here, look behind the ogre's neck and his shoulder line. See that big crack? Inherently, when these pieces are filled together, depending on how hard you're pressing them and how well they're cut out, you are going to have some seams, and some of the seams are going to be quite noticeable. So again, using silicon sculpting tools and green stuff, we need to fill those cracks. Depending on how picky you want to be, will determine how anal you're going to be about filling the cracks. And I used to use liquid green stuff, and I still do sometimes, but I'm finding a lot more using green stuff in the sculpting tools to actually wedge it down in the crack and smooth it out with water. And the different silicon tools, texturizing, and as you can see in this video here, I'm getting pretty good at it. So depending on how important it is for you to have seamless models, you're going to need to do this filling step. And that's just a thing with all assembled models, whether it be from WizKids, Frameworks, or Games Workshop. I purposely left one side of our ogre's flank unseamed, like unfilled, so you could see the difference. And then we're going to see that at the end of this little segment. But again, looking at the little tip here, using it, and then this to push it around. Again, it's a trial and error thing. If you don't smooth it out smooth enough, you're going to see a bulge on the finished product. But I didn't when I was done, because I used, again, it's just water and green stuff and working it and just getting it in the crack, not pushing it in so far so that it actually goes inside the crack and leaves a divot, right? You don't want a little groove. That's the whole point. You're trying to seal it. I'm sealing under his chin there. Because there was a seam. When I was putting the head on, even though it had the tongue and groove, I had to choose, do I press hard at the back of the neck so there's no seam and leave a seam at the throat, or do I push the jaw down to seal the throat but leave a gap at the back of the neck? And since the back of the neck, in retrospect, I should have left it at the back of the neck because there's a cowl that covers it anyways. I chose the throat because I could use this green stuff to mold the muscles and the veins and the arteries, which I did. I was very proud of it. But like I said, the back of the neck would have been the better answer because it's going to be covered with a cowl, should you so decide. But either way, you're going to have to decide one way or another, and you're going to have to fill it. So here's a look at the finished green stuff filling. From head on, it's very flush with his skin. And once it's primed, you can't even see it anymore. And again, here's the side that I left. See the crack once it's painted? And the side of the other side where I filled it, there's nothing. It blends in beautifully. So, on to paint. Now these come unprimed, which is great because you can control the primer and the brand of primer and the amount of primer. I use Chaos Black from Citadel. First I affixed them onto a spray painting, it's a meter stick. I put all the pieces down with sticky tack, as you can see here. Take them out to the garage on a box and I give them a little bit of spray. Now I also use a second coat of white to kind of zenithal, and a Paint to Life viewer just suggested I use white ink because I got, again, that spackle look with the spray rattle can. I thought it was my airbrush, but no, it's just white. So I'm using a white ink the next time, and we'll see an airbrushed white ink for next time zenithal priming. My airbrush is an Iwata Eclipse, and I'm starting this ogre paint job off with that using a Citadel paint. No, this wasn't in Citadel. This is called Pale Flesh from Green Stuff World. I tried something different with the skin tone. I'm not the best with skin tones. I usually start dark and make it light at the top. This time I wanted to start light and make it progressively darker. So there were some areas that were lighter than others. And that's why this first layer of Pale Flesh went on with the airbrush, and he looks super Caspery. Next, some Cadian Flesh Tone. And also back there I mentioned I put about 5 drops of the thinner in as well from Vallejo. So Cadian Flesh Tone just on top of the Pale Flesh to give a little bit more color. Not everywhere, leaving the lower areas a little bit lighter. This is a fun trick. I just use Blood Reaver Flesh and flick it. And what you see here is, if you look at that finished picture, see those little flicks of paint? They kind of look like moles and spots, and I think it just makes the flesh look more natural when everything's said and done. Now a contrast paint, Dark Oath Flesh. to go on top of the two different skin tones, more so on the shoulders and the back. I wanted this ogre to kind of look weathered, so I wanted the top parts of his body to be darker than the under parts because of sun. Now onto Iron Warriors for the ball and chain. I customized this. I really liked the offhand maul they had with the sword sticking out of it. It was really cool, and I'll touch on that at the end of my review. But when I saw this manacled ball and chain, it gave me the whole idea of the prison and the story of the ogre. So we have this cool looking tree with a really funny fork taped to the end of it, or wired to the end, and here we are, catch 10 flesh, just basing out this cool fence post or tree that's sharpened at the tip. But yeah, that's the thing that was kind of fun with Frameworks. When you're putting it together, deciding on the pieces, especially for me, Paint to Life, I'm deciding what part that's going to play in the story. Now, for the boots, a default Talaran sand for the first layer of leather, if you will. A Talaran sand is like a nice yellowy gray brown, and it's good to add different colors so that you can layer them up later or use contrast paints on them. So for all the fur, Doom Bull Brown was my go-to. It's a really rich mahogany brown with like nice red undertones, and goes really good with gore grunt contrast, which we'll see later. I don't know why, something about it just, well, they're probably made to go together. I really enjoy the two. So anywhere on the model where there were fur, which was the loincloth and the boots, got the Doom Bull Brown treatment. Now, we're on that loincloth now. He's got a nice belt that goes around his waist, which we're going to bypass and just do the fur. These are Pallid Witch Flesh. These are the heads that are going to be on his waist. It's a small little sidebar, starting with Pallid Witch Flesh just to give him a dead look, and I'll touch it up a bit later. And this is the fox, or I guess it's a bear pelt, starting again with Doom Bull Brown, and gonna hit it a bit later as well with other, make it lighter, because you don't want it to be the same color as his pants and stuff. And this charm that he wears, Flayed One Flesh, it's going to be a bone skull. I'm using a different, other than wraith bone, just to get a different color on it. Hobgrot hide for the leather belt. It's very yellow. Once we treat it with some contrast paint, it will take its final form, but for now it's going to be yellow. I really like the Citadel mustard paints, as I call them, the very earthy yellows and browns. They all behave so fun with different color contrast paints. It's really a joy to paint with them. Pink horror for inside of his mouth, just to get some tongue action and mouth action in there. Yeah, not much to say about that. Pink horror, cool name. Iron Warriors, he has this knee pad. It's just an iron spike, so we'll just use Iron Warriors. Iron Warriors is the darkest of the metallic iron colors from Citadel, so I like it for dirty iron. So now we're going to put some Sylvaneth bark. It's a dry brush paint on top of that bear, on top of the Doom Bull Brown, to lighten up the hide. And then on to Pallid Witch Flesh for this big boy's teeth. Now I'm using a rat skin flesh, which is similar to one of the midtones in his flesh right now, but I'm just a solid color for lips, muscle veins, eyebrow ridges, side of his head, ears, anything I want to be a solid dark color because it's either small or thick. It kind of found its way inside the rest of his skin tones. And for the tree now, we're going to add a Steel Legion drab. It's not a dry brush, but it's not also, is it a paint? I'm not painting, pushing hard on it to change the color of that. I'm gently adding lots of water and gently going over it just so that the top darker part stays brown. And the lighter part gets the light treatment. Now there's these cool arrows in this arm, which I'm painting up right now nondescriptly. I'm going to paint them like arrows with a little bit of gore. And afterwards I finished with this, I thought about this, and I'm going to say it probably at the end too in my review, but geez, what if I just used multiple arms and added magnets so I could interchange them? You know, because that would have given me both options, the manacles as well as the manacle as well as the cool club with the sword sticking out of it, kind of like Renato at Heroes and Beasts with swap minis, you know, plugging in, and people do that in Games Workshop. If you've never seen swap minis, Google Heroes and Beasts 3D printing swap miniatures. I've featured them on Paint to Life before. So now a little bit of skeleton horde contrast paint on top of that charm, just to give it a bone-like appearance, and dark oak flesh on the faces. And we got some orange, squig orange hair on the dwarf's head and beard. And I think the elf just gets like a black or a dark brown. I don't think I showcased it. I know I got some of this orange paint on the elf's hair and never took it off, so that was frustrating. So here's the Gorgrunter fur I was telling you about earlier. Take control. Remember, anytime you use a brush or you build up a color with the airbrush, it's not so easy to fix. If I was to hit his chest right now with that, it would be over. You lose that airbrushing effect. You have to start it all over or something drastic. So make sure your brush control is on point and go over all that Doom Roll brown with the Gorgrunter fur, and that'll make you happy. Also, the legs over here have those little panty boots. So throw that on top of the straps and the fur. Some Goldfag brown dry brushing on top of the bear headdress. Now just white, or maybe it's pallid witch flesh, but I'm trying to hit those pupils. The details on the frameworks are very succinct. There are little teeny round eyeballs in there, and if you can just clip them with the white, they pop right out. They look awesome. So on top of that Hobgrad hide, I'm going to use an Agaros Dunes contrast paint, which is a yellowy brown on top of an already kind of mustardy brown, to bring out a different color of leather than some of the other leather combinations like snakebite leather. I like Agaros Dunes is definitely a contrast paint you should have in your arsenal. Now this is Reikland Flesh Shade. He was pretty light. I did want him darker on the tops, as I said, so I started applying this gently, very, very watered down, and I really liked the effect. And I brushed it into the topmost parts of his muscles, leaving the underside lighter. So under his arms is lighter. I don't know. I always hate painting flesh. I always think I'm ruining it, but I just can't stand a pasty Casper-like appearance on something that's in the sun all the time and it's covered with dirt and filth. So that's why I darken it up. Some detail for these little ropes, Talaran sand on top of the club, and this is called Wildwood. It's one of the really dark brown contrast paints going over top of the club in the colors that I already chose, just to give it a real back to dark look. I guess I didn't like it as light as it was, and I'll bring back some of that lightness later. This is Blood for the Blood God, for the gore aspect, a bit on his tongue and a bit underneath the heads. And Typhus Corrosion is a technical paint. Use a garbage brush when you apply it. It just adds like a really dirty brown oxide look to anything that's iron, so any ogres or orcs would probably have that. Oh yeah, stupid alert, not that bad. But I am about to try and put on some light on top of that Gorgrunter for Jumbo Brown. I don't know. And as soon as I did it, I'm like, oh no, I've wrecked it. So if you make that mistake, quickly add water to it. As long as the paint underneath was dry, if you add water and scrub real hard, you can get most of it off. There was a little bit of like chalkiness left, so a little bit more of the contrast paint, Gorgrunter fur, and it's like it never happened. Happy accident number 4. When you're assembling this miniature, don't assemble his legs until later. Paint it separately. It's a mistake to avoid. If you assemble it, you lose access to a lot of space. As you can see, I painted the legs separately from the torso, and once they were both done, I assembled them and saved myself a lot of tricky headaches. Another idea, or a mistake, happy accident I thought I was going to make, I was originally planning on magnetizing this helmet. So if we look here, there's the ogre with nothing. Here's the ogre with that bear headdress on. And then here's the ogre with the necklace around his neck. And I was going to magnetize the helmet so you could take it on and off at your desire, but the truth is the customizability of this means you can have your cake and eat it too. One, you didn't have to do that. You could just see it's on there, it just comes on and off without a magnet. And two, this necklace, I wanted both at the same time, so I said, let's try both. So as you saw, I cut the necklace in half, and I'm just trying it on and seeing whereabouts it needs to go. It sort of sits on his belly there. So I found the sweet spot. I chopped off just enough so that the bear's arms would go over top of the parts I'd cut off of the necklace, and then I glued the necklace to his chest. And after gluing the necklace to his chest, then I proceeded to get the bear arms and the bear headdress glued onto the top of his head. There was a little spot missing where I chopped a little too much, so a little bit of green stuff back to our sculpting tools just to make it meet and connect, and then paint it with Iron Warriors to match up and typhus corrosion just like the necklace below it. And there you go. You have your headdress and your necklace. Cake and eat it too, as I like to say. And there it is. One of the final steps here is using lead belcher to delineate the rings on the manacle, just the raised parts. It's like a layering, just a little lighter. Lead belcher's a lot brighter than the Iron Warriors, and then a quick coat of Nuln Oil to darken it all back up in the recesses to make it look like a prison ball. Now in Paint to Life, I'm known for some big bases, but in this case I wanted to try it. That sad bubblegum looking piece of flat is what comes with the Ogre, and the clear transparent base. This time I affixed the Ogre to the clear transparent base so that you could see the dungeon tiles underneath. There's a Forest Ogre, there's a Dungeon Ogre, etc. Here's the Ogre with a Mind Flayer behind him, and Nozel's Marvelous Miniatures Cleric. So, alright, it's time for my final review of the Frameworks Ogre. Number 1, ease of assembly. For this I gave it 4.5 tanks out of 5. I found the bigger pieces were much easier to handle, they weren't too small to lose versus the Mind Flayer. The tongue and groove connection is a great idea, and as WizKids has suggested, adding it to more parts would make a lot of sense. 1.5 digit off because some of the small parts melted, but that was probably just me being a little too heavy-handed with the plastic cement. Next up, customization options. 5 tanks out of 5. Great choices in weapons. The manacle and ball and chain gave me the idea for my Paint to Life prison story. I loved the club and the custom pieces with the sword sticking through it. That was really cool. And I was able to customize to have the bear helmet and the chain at the same time, which was cool. I'll also mention again that I did like the idea that you could remove the headdress and the necklace interchangeably, which was a nice touch. So next, for cool factor, I gave it 4 out of 5 tanks. It's a good looking mini, but the base itself, the gray, flat, bland area, is very boring. I put it on the clear base just to see how it would look without it, so you could see different layered mats underneath, like I said. But it'd be nicer if those chewed bubblegum flat things had a little bit more excitement going on for them. So, the overall rating for the Ogre, 4.5 tanks out of 5. I really enjoyed the larger Frameworks miniature. I think the smaller pieces of the small size ones give me a little bit of grief. The bigger ones are right up my alley, and I think the bigger I go when I get up into the huge size are going to just make me even more happy. The quality and detail, the veins in the muscles, just top notch, and without the primer pre-primed of the nozzles gunking it up. Very, very happy with how this looks. So can hardly wait to work on the huge one eventually, and then one day one of the gargantuan ones. But for now, my first large was a success. So next week's going to be the Drider. Here's a couple pictures of the finished Ogre for you to peruse. If you have any questions about this review or this miniature or any of the things that I did, feel free to email me at painttolife@gmail.com or leave a comment down in the comments below. I'll respond to all of them. Thank you very much for watching Paint to Life. I'm GM Atank, and hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Wash your hands, people.